The wind came screaming down off the mesa, tugging at the roof shingles of the lonely Boone homestead and kicking up grit that stung the eyes. Clara Boone pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped onto the porch, watching the sun stretch long shadows over the scrubland. The prairie was gold and empty, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring, but Clara had learned long ago to read the language of silence. And silence on this evening seemed too thick, too still. She set down the bucket and rubbed her knuckles, stiff from years of working wood and bread dough, from holding on to a life that had long since unraveled. The door behind her creaked open as if drawn by memory alone. No one inside to cause the sound. No one but her. Her husband, Silas, had been buried 3 years now. Her boy, Jonah, not quite 5 when cholera took him, laid beside his father under the lone cottonwood tree a few yards from the house. Clara hadn't left the prairie since. Where would she go? She wasn't welcome back east, too stubborn, too strange, too stained with grief. And the nearest neighbor was 4 miles west, a widow herself who rarely left her own plot of dust and corn. A distant howl, a coyote or something else, carried faint on the wind. Clara turned, squinting toward the hills. The sun dipped lower, setting the horizon on fire. Time to get inside. She reached for the bucket, but her fingers stopped. A flicker, movement on the ridge. She froze. There it was again. A shape swaying, staggering. A man. Clara narrowed her eyes. Dust and distance distorted his outline, but he was stumbling, lurching like a man whose legs didn't want to obey. He crested the ridge and then collapsed, a dark stain folding into the earth. She didn't move. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Drunk? Sick? A trap? The stories out here weren't kind. Raiders who played wounded, bounty hunters who baited homesteads, desperate men with nothing to lose and less to give. But he hadn't looked like a threat. Just broken. Clara's feet moved before her judgment could catch up. She grabbed the old Henry rifle from the doorframe, loaded a round with shaking fingers and started toward him. The closer she came, the more his features emerged from the dust. He was young, maybe mid-20s, skin darkened by sun but not just sun. He was native, though Clara couldn't place the tribe. His face was cut and bruised, blood crusted along his temple. His clothes were torn, boots caked in dried mud and something darker. There was no horse. No weapons in reach. "Sir?" she asked, voice quiet but firm. "Can you hear me?" A rasp. Then a cough. His lips moved but no words came. His eyes fluttered open, catching hers with startling clarity. Then they rolled back and he passed out cold. She knelt, checked his pulse, faint but there. His skin was burning up. Fever. Clara looked around. No other riders. No tracks except his, already half-washed by wind. Damn it. She hooked her arms under his and dragged him inch by inch back toward the cabin. The task should have been impossible, but something old and deep inside her had already made the choice. He was lighter than Silas had been. Inside, she laid him on the floor beside the hearth, stoking the embers back to life. The cabin's warmth seemed to stir him, but his breathing came shallow, ragged. Clara fetched water from the barrel and soaked a cloth, pressing it to his forehead. She examined his wounds, one deep gash on his thigh, crusted with grit. A slash along his ribs. Old bruises. Signs of a beating, not a fall. This man had been attacked. She stripped away the worst of his torn shirt, using scissors to cut the fabric gently from the wounds. The tattoos caught her eye, markings along his upper arm, faded but intricate. Not random. Tribal. Symbols she didn't recognize, but the care with which they were etched made them sacred. She wondered what they meant. Who he was. He groaned suddenly and she drew back. His eyes opened again, unfocused. "Water," he whispered. Clara brought the cup to his lips, tilting gently. He drank in tiny sips, but his hand caught hers as she started to pull away. "Why?" he murmured. Clara blinked. "Because you were dying." His grip weakened, then fell. He sank back into unconsciousness. She stood, breathing hard, unsure what to feel. The danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Through the window, twilight bled across the prairie. Clara moved to bar the door, checking the bolt twice. Then she lit a second oil lamp and began mixing flour and water. Her hands moved on instinct, kneading dough with mechanical precision. Bread had always been her offering. Her answer to pain. As the loaf baked in the iron stove, she sat beside the stranger, watching the firelight dance across his battered face. She thought of Jonah, of those final days when he'd clung to her hand and whispered about angels with feathered wings. She remembered how small he'd looked wrapped in the blanket that now covered this man. It struck her then, she was not afraid. She should have been. But fear was a shallow emotion next to the ache of loss. What could this man take from her that hadn't already been taken? When the bread was done, she tore off a piece, buttered it, and left it on a plate beside him. She doubted he could eat, but maybe the smell would rouse him. She didn't sleep. The night passed slowly, each creak of the house a potential omen. But no riders came. No second knock. Only the steady breathing of the stranger and the soft crackle of wood. At dawn, Clara dozed in the chair beside the hearth. A noise woke her, soft but definite. She blinked. The man was awake. He sat up slowly, wincing, hand pressed to his ribs. His eyes met hers, not panicked now but cautious. "You fed me," he said, voice hoarse. Clara nodded. "And cleaned you up. You were nearly dead." He looked down at the bread, then back at her. "No one would have done that. Not for me." "I did." Silence stretched. He studied her like a puzzle too complicated to solve. "You got a name?" she asked. "Wasichu," he said. "It's what my people call me. Means outsider." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's ironic." He smiled weakly. "A cruel joke." She reached for the bread, handed him a fresh piece. He took it with both hands like it was something holy. "You in trouble?" she asked. His expression darkened. He looked toward the window, then back at her. "Yes," he said. "And if they followed me?" She straightened. "Who's they?" He didn't answer. Just took a bite of bread and chewed slowly. Clara leaned forward, voice low. "If you brought danger to my door, I have a right to know." "I didn't mean to," he said. "I was running. Escape. Thought I'd die out there. Then you found me." A gust of wind slammed against the cabin. Clara looked toward the door, half expecting it to swing open. Wasichu flinched. "If they come, you'll be marked too. For helping me." Clara's heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "Let them try." Another silence. "Not fearful now," charged. "I should leave," he said. "You can barely walk," she replied. "And you're bleeding again." He didn't argue. Just looked down at the bread in his hands, like it held more weight than it should. Outside, the sun rose over the prairie, casting long golden stripes across the dusty floor. Clara stood and moved to the window. And froze. The horizon was dotted with figures, still small but growing clearer. Riders. A dozen at least. Maybe more. Wasichu struggled to his feet, stumbling. "No. They found me." Clara didn't move. She watched the riders approach, the dust of their horses swirling like a storm behind them. "No," she whispered. "They found me." And somehow, deep down, she knew the cost of kindness was only just beginning. The wind shifted again, but this time it carried more than dust. Clara tasted it in the back of her throat, sweat, smoke, something metallic. Trouble had crossed the horizon. She didn't speak. Neither did Wasichu. The silence stretched as the riders came closer, growing in number and detail with each passing second. Their shapes emerged like ghosts, tall men on broad horses, cloaked in earth-toned blankets and feathers, adorned with paint that caught the morning light in unnatural colors. Spears and rifles bristled among them. At their center, a woman rode slightly ahead, her face unreadable, gaze locked on the cabin. Wasichu's breath hitched beside her. "It's them? Your people?" Clara asked, not taking her eyes off the riders. He nodded slowly. "Some of them. What do they want?" He swallowed hard. "Me." The hoofbeats now thudded like a war drum across the dirt. Clara stepped back from the window, her heart thudding in rhythm. She glanced at her rifle on the wall. A reflex. "No," Wasichu said, his voice sharper than it had been. "If they see you armed, they'll assume hostility." Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to taking orders in her own home, but the way he looked at her, equal parts urgency and regret, made her pause. She nodded once and stepped away from the rifle. When the riders finally halted in front of the cabin, dust churned around them like a summoned spirit. The woman at their center dismounted first. She moved with deliberate grace, her gaze raking the porch, the windows, finally landing on Clara as she stepped outside. "You're the woman who took him in," the woman said. Her English was clean, precise, but it carried a tension that made Clara's spine stiffen. "I am," Clara said. The woman nodded once, then motioned to her people. 3 men dismounted and strode forward. Wasichu stepped into the doorway behind Clara, leaning on the frame. "Mika," he said, voice low. The woman turned sharply. Her eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be alive." "Glad to see you too," he muttered. The 3 men hesitated just short of the porch. One of them, older and heavy-set, spat on the ground. "He should be with the dead, not the white woman." "I was dying," Wasichu replied. She saved me. That sparked murmurs among the riders. The old man growled something in his own tongue, but Mika raised a hand and silence returned. You left, she said. You bled. You brought danger back to us. Wasichu's voice turned hard. I didn't bring the danger. They followed me. Clara felt suddenly peripheral, as if the air had shifted and the world had become a stage not built for her. But she couldn't allow that. Not here. Not now. I didn't know who he was, she said. He collapsed on my land. I gave him bread. That's all. Mika's gaze shifted to her again. Not with hostility but something sharper, calculation. Bread is not nothing, she said. Not when the man you feed has enemies. Clara stood tall. I don't regret helping him. I regret nothing. For a moment, there was only the sound of the horses breathing, the wind moving over the hills. Then Mika turned to Wasichu. Then come with us. Answer to what you've done. What I've done, he snapped. I tried to bring peace. I tried to stop the blood. And for that I was beaten. Sold. Left to die. The elder man barked something guttural, stepping forward again, but Mika held him back with a glare. She turned to Clara. You will come too. If he stays here we cannot protect you. If they come, those who want him dead, they'll burn everything you own. Wasichu looked stricken. No. Leave her out of this. Clara folded her arms. I've already fed you. That makes me part of it whether I like it or not. Mika studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You have an hour. Bring what you need. No one stayed behind. Even the horses seemed to watch her with suspicion as she packed. She didn't bring much, just her shawl, the journal she kept hidden under the floorboards, a few strips of dried meat, and the old rifle. Mika said nothing when she saw the weapon, only nodded once in approval. They rode in near silence. The landscape unfolded like a scroll, dry creek beds, red buttes, a grove of twisted cottonwoods. Clara had never gone this far west before. Her entire life had shrunk to a single point of survival after her family died, and now it stretched again, unwillingly. Wasichu rode beside her, slumped in the saddle but alert. The bruises on his face had darkened, and he moved stiffly, but there was something inside him that refused to bend. You didn't have to come, he said. Clara shrugged. I'm no stranger to danger. Besides, I want to hear the rest of your story. You won't like it. I don't expect to. By dusk, they reached the encampment, a half-circle of lodges nestled in a shallow valley shielded by trees and stone. Fires already burned, casting long orange shadows. Children stared as Clara rode in, their eyes wide with questions. A few dogs barked, then lost interest. Mika dismounted and addressed the gathered tribe in their native tongue. Her voice rose and fell with practiced authority. At one point, she gestured toward Clara. All eyes turned. The murmur was low, but Clara felt its heat. She'd lived with whispers before. This was different. This was judgment. They led her to a small tent on the edge of camp. It smelled of smoke and earth, but it was warm. A blanket had been laid out. When Mika appeared at the entrance, Clara stood. You're not under arrest, Mika said. But you are watched. Fair enough, Clara replied. Mika regarded her in silence. Then she asked, Why did you do it? Clara didn't pretend not to understand. Because I know what dying alone feels like. Mika's expression shifted just slightly. Then she nodded and left. That night, Clara sat by the fire with Wasichu, a small bowl of stew warming her hands. Around them, the others spoke in their language, laughed quietly, and occasionally cast glances their way. They think I'm cursed, Wasichu said. Or worse, traitor. Are you? He stared into the flames. I tried to make peace with the cavalry. Told them we didn't want war. I thought they wanted the same. But they tricked me. Turned me over to bounty hunters. Said I was wanted for stealing horses, murdering settlers. None of it was true. Just excuses. And your people? Half think I betrayed them. The other half are too afraid to say otherwise. Clara sipped the stew. You don't seem afraid. I am, he said. Every hour. She glanced at him. Good. That means you're alive. He gave her a faint smile, then turned toward the fire again. They sat in silence until a sudden hush fell over the camp. Clara looked up. Mika stood at the edge of the firelight, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on them. They've tracked you, she said. Wasichu stood. How close? Too close. We found a scout. He ran before we could catch him. He'll bring the others. Clara rose, heart thudding. How many? Mika's jaw clenched. More than we can scare off. The fire popped, a sharp sound in the stillness. We'll have to move the camp, Mika said. Before dawn. No, Wasichu replied. We make a stand. Mika's eyes flashed. You would have us fight? With children in the lodges? We fight here or run forever. They won't stop until I'm dead. And if they see you harboring me, they'll punish you too. Clara felt the truth of it like a stone in her gut. The storm she'd seen on the horizon wasn't passing through. It was coming to settle. She looked at Mika. What do you need from me? The tribal leader studied her again. And for the first time, there was no suspicion in her face. Only respect. Strength, Mika said. And perhaps, forgiveness. Clara nodded. You'll get both. They stared at one another a moment longer. Then Mika turned and disappeared into the shadows, her voice rising as she began to bark orders. Wasichu looked at Clara. You're not running? She shook her head. Not this time. He offered her his hand, not as a gesture of help, but as an equal. She took it. Together, they walked into the darkness, toward the place where a fire would soon be lit not for warmth, but for war. The morning came cloaked in a pale stillness, the kind that precedes either peace or violence. Clara stood at the edge of the valley camp, watching the first light spill across the grass like liquid fire. The sky was thin and sharp above, all angles and warning. Behind her, the tribe moved in purposeful silence, packing what they could, preparing for what they couldn't. Children were ushered toward the trees, elders given quiet directions. Spears were bundled with arrows, blades checked and sharpened. The younger warriors didn't speak much, but their eyes were flint, hard, lit with something ancient and unshakable. Clara saw in them not just courage, but memory. They had done this before. Wasichu approached with a slight limp, a fresh wrap over his ribs. His face was pale, but his steps were sure. The bruises on his cheekbone had turned the color of storm clouds. You slept? He asked, voice lower than usual. Clara shook her head. Dreamed with my eyes open. Same dream. No, she said. This one's awake. He nodded, and together they walked through the camp. People glanced up, some with gratitude, others with wary reserve. Clara didn't blame them. She was still the outsider, the white woman who dragged a hunted man back from the edge. That made her dangerous or foolish or both. At the center of the camp, Mika stood bent over a crude map drawn in the dirt. Lines scratched out trails, bluffs, old riverbeds. Her finger hovered over a slope to the east. We can't hold the valley itself, she said without looking up. Too open. But here near the ridge, the rocks narrow their path. If they come on horseback, they'll have to dismount or funnel in. A young warrior named Tashunka gestured with his knife. We can lay traps in the brush. Fire pits. Nets. Wasichu crouched beside Mika. I can ride ahead. Scout from the ledge. No, she said immediately. They'll shoot you on sight. Then I'll crawl, he offered, half grinning. Clara couldn't help it, she laughed, short and dry. Mika looked at her, surprised. What's funny? She asked. Just realizing, Clara said, this is the most alive I've felt in years. Mika tilted her head. Even now? Especially now. Mika stared a beat longer, then turned back to the map. We prepare. We strike first. We end this before it begins. The day bled forward, each moment sharpening into the next. Clara spent the hours hauling water, weaving thorn nets with a group of older women, learning the rhythm of a people who did not waste words. One child, a girl no more than 7, followed her silently for half an hour before finally holding out a polished stone. For luck, the girl whispered. Clara took it, closed her fingers around the smooth surface. Thank you. When the sun dipped low again, a hush fell over the camp. Fires were dimmed. Shadows thickened. The children had been moved further into the woods with 2 guards. The rest waited in their positions, bodies tucked behind brush, in crevices, beneath the rocks that framed the trail. Clara knelt beside Wasichu on the ridge. Below, the world stretched quiet and gold. Nothing stirred. Her fingers curled tightly around the rifle. I used to hate guns, she said. You don't now. No. I still hate them, she said. But I hate dying more. Wasichu smiled faintly. My father used to say weapons are like fire. Only the intent behind them makes them clean or dirty. Your father still alive? Wasichu shook his head. He died during the frost famine. Gave his food to my mother and me. I never stopped feeling guilty. Clara looked down at the polished stone in her palm, still clutched like a lifeline. Guilt's a long road. And where does it end? She looked at him. Here maybe. A bird screamed in the distance, sharp, unnatural. Wasichu tensed. That's not a bird. Clara saw them next. Shapes cutting over the far ridge, horses in a single-file line, silhouetted against the fading light. Men in worn coats and wide-brimmed hats, rifles strapped to their backs. Too organized for bandits. Too ragged for soldiers. Bounty hunters. Mika's signal came as a whistle, barely audible, almost gentle. And then everything exploded. The first fire pit ignited beneath a horse, flames roaring up like a demon's breath. The animal screamed, kicked, bolted sideways into the others. Men shouted, rifles raised too late. Arrows flew from the rocks, cutting into necks and shoulders with deadly precision. Clara fired once, missed, then adjusted her grip and tried again. This time the bullet found its mark. One of the attackers crumpled backward off his saddle. The narrow path worked just as Mika had planned. The horses couldn't spread, couldn't turn. The front riders tried to dismount, but two of them were caught in a net of thorns, tangled and screaming. Wasichu leapt down from the ledge, landing hard on his bad leg but staying upright. He dashed forward, blade drawn, cutting a man down as he tried to aim at Mika. Clara followed, running harder than she had in years. Her chest burned, but adrenaline erased the pain. She ducked low behind a tree, fired again. A third attacker fell. Then a fourth. Smoke filled the air now, black, thick, sour with burning hair and flesh. The hunters were retreating, pulling back, but not without fury. One tossed a torch into the tall grass behind the camp, trying to start a wildfire. Clara grabbed a bucket and ran. Others joined. Water flew. Flames hissed. The fire was smothered before it could spread. A scream turned her back to the ridge. One of the tribe's elders, a man called White Elk, stood facing three attackers, rifle jammed, eyes defiant. Before Clara could cry out, Wasichu appeared, slamming into one man with his shoulder, blade flashing. The other two turned, readying their rifles. Clara lifted hers, fired. One dropped. The other flinched, but not before his bullet found Wasichu. He fell. Clara ran. The sounds around her dulled. The chaos blurred. She reached him as he tried to rise, his hand pressed to his side. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and fast. "You're all right," she said, kneeling, voice shaking. "You're all right." Wasichu coughed, wincing. "Feels like a lie." "You'll live," she said. "I didn't drag you from death just to let you go now." He smiled faintly. "Bossy." Behind them the fighting had ended. The surviving attackers were either fleeing or captured. Mika moved through the field like smoke, issuing commands, checking bodies. The tribe stood tall, bloody but whole. Later, as the moon climbed above the wreckage and silence returned, Clara sat beside Wasichu in the healer's lodge. His wound had been packed and wrapped, and he drifted between sleep and wakefulness. Mika entered without speaking, crouching beside them. "You were brave," she said to Clara. "I was furious," Clara replied. "Close cousin to brave, I think." Mika smiled. "A rare thing. You've earned our protection. And our respect." Clara nodded. Her eyes were heavy, but her mind buzzed with noise. Mika stood to leave, then paused. "Your bread," she said. "It changed something." Clara looked down at her hands. "It's just bread." "No," Mika said. "It was a choice. And choices ripple." Alone again, Clara leaned back against the lodge wall, closing her eyes. The child's stone still sat in her pocket, warm from her body. She touched it once, then drifted into sleep, unsure whether the ache in her chest was exhaustion, or the start of something healing. "You said." The night lingered in the valley long after the stars took their places overhead, cool and vast above the charred trail of battle. Smoke curled in lazy ribbons from the dying fires, carrying with it the scent of ash, blood, and cedar. The camp had grown quieter, but not peaceful. Not yet. Victory had come at a price, and now the weight of survival began to settle like dust after a storm. Clara sat outside the healer's tent, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the aftermath, that brittle place where adrenaline had drained and only the ache remained. Wasichu still rested inside, his breathing steadier now, though shallow. The wound had been bad but not fatal. The bullet had missed the lung by less than an inch. "Luck," the healer said. "Or something else." Across the camp, Mika moved with the solemn precision of a war chief and a mother. She offered no celebration. Only quiet commands and long stares at the dark line of trees beyond the ridge. Though the danger had been turned away, Clara could see it in her, the certainty that it was not over. Tushunka approached, walking barefoot and soft. He carried a curved knife, its blade washed clean. When he reached Clara, he knelt beside her without a word and held out the weapon. She frowned. I didn't lose mine, she said. He shook his head. This is not a weapon you lost. It is one you earned. Clara hesitated, then took it in both hands. It was lighter than she expected. The handle was wrapped in sinew, the blade marked with a single etched feather, a symbol of honor, or burden. I'm not one of you, she said quietly. But you bled with us, Tushunka replied. That makes you more than an outsider. He left before she could answer. She stared down at the knife, feeling its weight settle in her lap like a question she couldn't yet answer. Inside the lodge, Wasichu stirred. Clara rose, brushing dirt from her skirt, and slipped through the flap. He blinked as she entered, eyes still fogged but clear enough to find hers. You're still here, he said. Where else would I be? He tried to smile. Came out crooked. I thought you might vanish. Like smoke. I'm not that graceful. She knelt beside him, adjusting the blanket at his side. His skin was warm but not burning. Healing had begun. But his body wasn't what worried her. They'll come again, won't they? She asked softly. He nodded. Different men. Same hunger. For you? For all of us. You wounded their pride. Made them bleed. That kind of pain doesn't sit quiet. Clara's jaw tightened. Then we fight again. You weren't born to this. No one is, she said. But here we are. He watched her a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he whispered, I was going to let myself die out there. I figured. You gave me bread. Clara smiled faintly. It's what I had. No, he said. It was more than food. It was faith. In a world that had none left. Her throat tightened. She looked away. You never told me your real name, he said suddenly. Clara blinked. You never asked. I'm asking now. She hesitated. It had been so long since she'd heard it spoken aloud. Clara May Hollis, she said. He repeated it, slow and quiet, like trying on something delicate. Clara May Hollis. The name settled into the air between them, and for a moment the lodge felt like a chapel. Then Mika entered, and the world turned sharp again. They've regrouped, she said, her tone flat. Clara stood. Already? Mika nodded. Scouts saw movement an hour east. 10, maybe 15 men. We don't know if they're waiting or watching. They'll strike soon, Wasichu said. They know hesitation makes them look weak. They also know we won't run, Mika replied. Then we prepare, Clara said, her voice stronger than she expected. Mika met her gaze. You're not just surviving anymore, are you? No, Clara answered. I'm choosing. By dusk, the camp was a flurry of motion again. But this time it wasn't about escape, it was about defiance. Warriors took their places not as prey but as sentinels. The children were hidden deeper in the trees, wrapped in silence. Clara helped reinforce barricades with sharpened stakes, her hands blistering but steady. Her rifle was cleaned, her knife tied to her belt. The ache in her limbs was alive, but she welcomed it. Wasichu insisted on walking, leaning on a carved staff for balance. His movements were slow but resolute. Clara watched him speak with the warriors not as a fugitive, but as a brother returned. His presence stitched something whole again in the eyes of the others. Night fell in full. The second attack did not come as thunder. It came like mist, quiet feet in the dark, low whispers in the grass. But the tribe was ready. This time it was Clara who gave the signal. The first shot cracked through the stillness, lighting the sky like lightning. Then came the cries, the clash of blades, the scream of wounded men. Clara fired twice before leaping down the embankment, her knife drawn. One man lunged at her from the brush. She sidestepped, drove the blade deep into his side, and shoved him back with a cry. Her heart roared in her chest, but her mind was clear. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. To her right, Wasichu battled two attackers at once, his staff swinging with deadly precision. Mika appeared like a shadow, slicing low and fast, her face painted with earth and resolve. Clara found herself back-to-back with Wasichu, their movements synchronized without words. When the final attacker fell, silence returned, but it was different this time. Not absence. Not dread. Relief. The bodies were dragged away. Fires were lit again. And Clara, hands bloodied and chest heaving, looked around the valley and felt something she hadn't known in years. Home. Later, as the moon rose and the fire crackled low, Mika stood before the gathered tribe. Clara and Wasichu beside her. The people were exhausted, injured, but whole. Mika raised her voice. We defended this place. With strength. With unity. With those we once thought were strangers. She turned to Clara. You gave bread to a dying man. And tonight you stood as our sister. The people murmured, then rose in a wave of sound, not loud but resonant. Acceptance. Clara stepped forward, unsure if her voice would work. I lost everything once, she said, and I thought that was the end. But it was only the beginning. Grief isn't a wall, it's a doorway. And on the other side, if you're lucky, is purpose. She looked at Wasichu, who nodded once. I came to the West to forget. Instead, I remembered who I am. The crowd fell quiet, but the silence was warm. Oh. Later, long after the fire dimmed and the camp drifted into sleep, Clara sat beside the tree at the edge of the ridge. Wasichu limped over and joined her. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "We could leave, you know. Find somewhere new." Clara shook her head. "This is where I wake up now." He smiled slowly. "Then maybe I'll stay asleep next to you." She looked at him, and in the hush between words, something settled. Not romance. Not quite. But connection. The kind that outlives flame and fury. Clara leaned her head back, looking at the stars, the same stars she'd watched when she buried Silas and Jonah beneath the cottonwood. They still burned. So would she. And across the land, the ripples of a simple act, of bread shared with a dying stranger, spread outward, reshaping the story of the wild.